Welcome to Golden Hour Ventures. Today we have awesome guests that let's just preface this that we've been anticipating this guest for a long time because we scheduled him back in March and then April, May, June, July, August, and now here on September 1st we're finally getting to being graced by his presence. But no, it's definitely not his fault. But he's gone on a lot of cool adventures, and we're excited to hear about it. But first up, Robbie, I feel like we need a van update.
Van update.
We haven't had a van update in a while, so tell us a little bit about your van and what's going on with it.
So I would say it is 85% done.
Okay.
I'm driving it every day.
Oh,
Yeah. Been running good. It's getting a sound system put in it here this next week. So, I can be bumping down the road.
the important things.
Important things. At work last week, I had to tear apart a crazy, sunglass display. And the manager was like, just hit it with the sledgehammer and break it up and throw it in the dumpster. So I go out and look at this thing, and it's made out of 3/4 inch plywood. And it's got metal all through it. Metal angle. And I'm like, there's no way I can break this thing up. So anyways, I tore it apart, and the bottom is actually a cabinet where the sunglasses go. So I threw that in the van last week. Now my cooler is on top of it. So I got a place for the cooler, and I was able to put a little storage box on top of that. So I got a little cooking area now. That's the van update.
Are you doing, is it like a hot pad type thing, or do you have a full, a little stove deal in there?
I just have one of those, I got a couple of different stoves. I got a backpacking stove, just a little one. Then
Yeah,
I have
okay.
a burner, 1 pound propane burner stove. Then I also have a couple camp stoves. I don't know how much I'll be cooking in there. I'm thinking maybe just coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
That's
Not
about
much
it.
ventilation or what?
So my plan with this build is still to be outside.
Okay.
If I'm up somewhere just hanging out, I want to be outside.
Yeah.
Main priority is if the elements do get bad, I can get in there and get, out of the elements. The main priority is to be doing most of the stuff outside, so cooking and hanging out and all that. That's the plan, anyways.
Cool.
I have learned that this is probably going to change multiple times before I find something that I like. I have the bed, different orientation than most people put their beds in this van, but I wanted somewhere to be able to sit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a futon couch style. So I can sit in there and hang out and do whatever. Eventually I want to do some podcast out of there. So once I get Starlink, that was another thought. But the problem with that is I give up a lot of space for storage.
Yeah.
So that's one downside. But so far, things are going good.
Awesome.
Keep plugging away at it. I'll
Heck
get there
yeah.
eventually. Then I'll tear it all apart and redesign it.
Awesome. Well, I'm always excited to hear about the van build. The van build. I'm excited to hear about that. The van build, because it's just something that's I've always thought was really cool, and I'm a little bit jealous you get to do it. It's cool. But let's get to our guest for the day, Brandon Wood. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's
Absolutely.
good to be here, finally.
Yeah, finally. Yeah, so, I made a little joke at the beginning, but Brandon's been scheduled a couple times, but one time he messaged me from the top of a mountain and was like, hey, we're 8 hours into a 4-hour run, and I think I'm going to have to cancel. And then another time was son's football game. So obviously that's way more important. So yeah, it's not a big deal, dude. We're glad to have you.
Well, I appreciate the understanding. Happy to finally have made it.
Yeah. So a little bit of background on how I met Brandon. We're both on the Ultra Sign Up team. And so we met each other through that. And so I think I'd already followed you on social media, and we'd maybe talked like briefly.
Yeah,
But then,
maybe a little here and there.
yeah, but then the White Mountain 100 came up and both of us were running it and we finally met each other at the packet pickup. And then, we saw each other at the beginning of the race. And then at mile 30, I caught up to you and we ended up running the whole race together, which I thought was
Yeah.
really cool. You held back to help me out.
Well, I don't know about that, but no, it's cool how that works out. Like, I mean, we didn't really have a plan to run together necessarily, but after 30 miles or so, we just kind of ended up falling into about the same pace. And I certainly like having somebody out there if it works out that way. So that was pretty cool.
I think you helped put my wife's mind at ease when she couldn't be out there, knowing that
Yeah.
there was somebody else there with me. I think that, that definitely helps out because she was really worried as well as I was a little bit about being out in the elements and, you never know what you can run into out there. It's so remote.
Well, yeah, that's a much different sort of race where it's like the entire thing is remote. I mean, there's checkpoints, but there's no, accessibility for crew or anything like that. So yeah, you're just totally out there. I mean, even to compare it to like Susitna 100, there's at least a couple of those checkpoints that are, that are accessible, where a crew could meet you. And so you have at least a few, potential touch points there if you needed. But yeah, with White Mountains, you're out there for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what got you into running winter ultras? I mean, I guess we could even back up a little bit further and like go through your running journey and how you got into running these crazy winter 100s.
Yeah. I mean, going all the way back. So about around 2010, I was the stereotypical overweight, out of shape kind of thing going on, and that was around the time my daughter was born. And something finally clicked with me, like, hey, I gotta someone's gotta change here. I got 2 kids now. Someone's got to change if I'm going to be around and be healthy for them and be a good example for them, those kinds of things. And so, started eating better, wanted to do something for exercise. At the time, didn't really want to pay for like a gym membership or anything like that. So foolishly thought, oh, I'll run around the block. All I need is a pair of sneakers and a pair of shorts, and this is a cheap, easy, no big deal. I'll just run around the block. And so started with one of those like Couch to 5K apps on my phone, and where you're running for like 30 seconds at a time at first, and just never thinking it was going to really end up being much of anything other than maybe a couple miles around the neighborhood or something. And just kind of as time went on and was started adding distance, kind of started realizing like, hey, I actually like this thing. And then by the end of that year, I had lost about 90 pounds.
Wow.
And ran my first marathon like that December. And then I think two years later in 2012, a guy I met at another race, as so often happens, you meet people and they end up being, bad influences and get you to, talk you into bad ideas. And we were running a marathon, and it's kind of like what happened with you and me. Like I had never even, like, we met during the race, like, like halfway into the race, we just kind of, same sort of thing, sort of settled into like a similar pace, and we just sort of started running together and chit-chatting. And by the end of it, we were like, yeah, we're going to go run Resurrection Pass 50 miler this summer together. Talked each other into, running a 50 miler together. And so that was in, like 2012. So did that. And then, of course, then that led to, well, next year, let's run the 100. And so did that. And so I was, like 2013, ran my first 100. And then, ever since then, just kind of, just keeps escalating from there.
What's the drive with doing the winter ultras? Because they're completely different than your
It is.
typical, and it's hard to
Definitely.
explain to people that, like, yeah, you carry everything you need on your back. For the whole
Yeah.
100, you don't have crew, you don't have pacers. Like, it's hard to explain that people understand it, but then like doing
Right.
it versus doing a regular race,
Yeah,
you know.
much different than, running a quote unquote regular 100 miler where
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
got,
regular
you might
100.
have, eight, yeah, you always have to qualify that because none of this is regular. None of this is normal at all. But yeah, I mean, it's much different than, going and running. I mean, like another 100 I've ran, I did like Rocky Raccoon down in Texas. And, there's aid stations like every, it's almost like running a marathon, maybe not quite that much, but yeah, you've got an aid station every like 4 or 5 miles.
Yeah,
You could get away with carrying like a single handheld and just, snacking at all the aid stations. And, um, so starting out with the winter ultras up here was kind of similar to what I was saying before. So my cousin, she does a lot of this stuff as well. And so we kind of did the same sort of thing at one point and kind of talked each other into signing up for the Susitna 100 together. And that was, I want to say that was like 2017 was the first time I did that one. And yeah, I mean, that's just like a whole different beast and with that one, like because they have enough required gear, like a sleeping bag and some things like that, where pretty much all the runners are pulling a sled. And so that adds a whole other element. Like we're kind of able to get away from that and at White Mountains because they don't have all the required gear. But yeah, at Susitna, you're pulling a sled and it's the same sort of thing. Got all your food with you, everything you need. But it adds a whole different element to it, which I wasn't, going into it the first time I was a little apprehensive about it, not sure how that was going to go. But I've found that I really like it. I mean, I've lived up in Alaska my whole life, so I guess I'm used to the cold. I found the hard way that I don't handle running in the heat real well. I've had a couple of DNFs at, like hot races where
yeah,
it's ended up being, 90s or even up into the hundreds. And that just kills me. And so I've kind of found like my niche in the winter races. It seems to work well for me and I enjoy them. So I keep coming back.
yeah. How many winter hundreds have you done?
It's 9 now. I've done Susitna 5 times and White Mountains 4 times.
Any goals to go down to the lower 48 and do like Arrowhead or any of those?
It's funny you ask that. I was up at 5 a.m. this morning to sign up for Arrowhead.
Congrats,
The
you got in?
registration, yeah. Well, I don't know yet.
Okay.
You have to get in. You have to before it fills up. But then they still have like an application process. Like you have to basically like list out your credentials and like I've run this, like what I was just listing, these are other winter races I've done and this is how it went and stuff like that. So you also have to it's not enough just to make it in, before it fills up. You also have to be like accepted. So I may not know about that for another 2 or 3 weeks, but
I feel like you have a pretty good resume to back up your application.
yeah,
Most
I
definitely.
think so. I mean, I hope so. We'll see. They actually very explicitly say that they give preference to race veterans, which is interesting. So I don't know exactly what that means, how hard it is to get in as like a first, a rookie for that race. So we'll see. But I'm hopeful. Yeah, I mean, I've done a good number of these winter races, so we'll see. But yeah, so both Arrowhead and Susitna opened up today, so I was up early to register for both of those.
Nice. What's been your, out of the 9 that you've done, what has been your most memorable experience in the winter racing?
So there was one year at Susitna that there was just basically a giant snowstorm for pretty much the entire race. And that one could just vary so much. And just based on weather. Um, and it was just almost comical at times how much, new snow was on the course. And really the only thing, I think the biggest thing that saved me during that race was, well, kind of similarly to like what we've talked about, um, there's actually three other guys, so there was a group of four of us that, at about the same, after about 30 miles, we all kind of just ended up conglomerating together. And they were all guys that I knew from previous. It's a lot of same people that run that race every year, but we all kind of glommed onto each other and stuck together for the rest of the race. But I guess one of those like misery loves company, or we all just kind of laughed at the absurdity of the situation for like how bad it was. I mean, there were a few sections where, just between the snow falling and maybe a little bit of wind, I mean, literally, like you can't even see where the trail is. I mean, they do, unlike it, White Mountains, where like that trail there was hardly any trail markers at all there. Susitna is very well marked, and so there's a lot of places where you're just having to like look out ahead and just like spot where that next trail marker is, and then just kind of aim for that, because literally you cannot see where the trail was. I mean, normally it's not like that, but this particular year, like if it had been long enough since the people in front of us had come through, that it was just totally swept over, and you couldn't even see any evidence of trail.
That's got to be miserable.
But it was. I mean, there's been many times where I've thought, I'm like, if I wasn't with those guys, like I don't think I could have. I don't know. I'm not sure I could have kept going just on my own, just the mental side of it, but just having, them, the other guys there, and just talking. And again, just even if we're all just kind of laughing at how absurd it all was. And yeah, I mean, it ended up that was by far my slowest finish ever. And that was like almost 43 hours that it took us.
Wow.
But it was pretty intense. And then just to kind of put it into perspective, I think that same year I also ran White Mountains. I think like 6 weeks later, maybe, where the conditions were much more favorable. And 6 weeks later, I ran that race in like 26 hours.
Cool.
So it's just, I mean, it's just varies so much, just based on the course conditions and what the weather's doing. I mean, I also have my fastest 100-miler finish at Susitna, but that was just like totally perfect year. All the great weather, trails were hard packed and fast, and did that in like 22 and a half hours. So
wow.
It can just vary, very widely.
Yeah. Now, you want to explain the difference between the Susitna and White Mountain races?
Yeah, I mean, really, one of the biggest primary ones is kind of what I was talking about with the gear. So with Susitna, they have a list of required gear that you have to have. So you have to have like a sleeping bag that goes down to -20. You have to have some type of like bivy, or you can do a tent. But most people have just like a basic bivy, a sleeping pad, and then you have to have I think it's like 3,000 or 3,000 calorie reserve that they basically you don't plan to eat, but it's more like if in case of emergency, you have essentially like a day's worth of calories that are in reserve. I think they say like like after you pass the last checkpoint at mile 90, then you can start to eat those calories if you want. So like in the last 10 miles. But that's always kind of a fun one, because with just the calorie requirement, because you see people getting very creative with like, well, if I'm going to have to carry all these calories with me, like what's the lightest or what's the smallest thing that I can possibly do to get my 3,000 calories. And so I may see people with just like literally like sticks of butter, which is kind of like a musher thing. Um, my cousin who has done it before, she will go and buy like a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts because apparently that's like pretty much exactly 3,000 calories, and then she'll vacuum pack it so that it just like I mean, it would be disgusting to eat it because it's just all a big nasty mess. But she just so she'll like vacuum pack it just to get it into this tight little package. And
That's pretty
like
funny though.
yeah, and I like usually what I do, I went down to the grocery store and went to the peanut butter aisle and just started looking at labels and just got one of the smaller jars of peanut butter and just kept looking at labels and doing the math until I found one that came in at like just over 3,000 calories. But you see some interesting things that people come up with
I can't imagine like if you
calories.
have to eat that. Can you imagine eating like a whole jar of peanut butter in the last 10
Yeah, well,
miles?
yeah, that's the trade-off, obviously. It's like, well, if I actually had to eat this, but at the same time, like, would you want to, eat a stick of butter or,
No.
or so it's
Or a dozen
yeah,
donuts that have been vacuum sealed.
exactly, a dozen donuts that's vacuum sealed and probably frozen solid now and
Yeah.
all that. And then, yeah, so White Mountains, you don't have any of that. In general, they're both pretty similar in terms of like number of checkpoints. Like I think both of them are pretty similar. Like I think more or less about like 20 miles between checkpoints. I think Susitna may have one extra checkpoint than White Mountains does. But pretty, generally pretty similar as far as that goes. Susitna is pretty flat. I think the whole thing has, like 2,000 feet of elevation gain or something like that. It's pretty minor. And so as far as that goes, White Mountains definitely has a lot more variation, a bit more scenic. And I still love Susitna. If nothing else, like kind of the whole community around it is really great, and like the race directors and the volunteers, because it's a lot of the same people out there every year. So it's kind of like a big family reunion, going back there every year and seeing a lot of the same people and all that. But I will say the White Mountains definitely is a bit more scenic and interesting of a race course.
Yeah, we had a really cool year. I mean, I don't know what you've had in the past, but I think it was really cool with like the moon being a full moon and shining on the mountains, and then the aurora popping out over the mountains. Like that was a pretty special treat at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Those northern lights were we've had a little bit of northern lights other years that I've done it, but this past year was definitely the strongest, the most that I've seen them out overnight. So yeah, that was definitely very cool.
Does the distance between aid stations, does that mess with you? I would assume not now because it's been 9 races, but it really messed with me mentally, like going, and I'm sure you heard me complaining while we were out there about it, but because you become best friends when you're out on the trails together. But 20 miles between aid stations for someone who's never experienced that, and that was my fourth 100. But I've always done races that are the quote unquote easier, where they're 4 to 5 miles apart, maybe max 10 miles, and not having to carry everything. But it seems like the 20 mile, that's a mind play.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. It still is. I mean, yeah, even after having done a number of these, it definitely is. I mean, it's a long way, especially during 100. And the pace that you're going. That's it's potentially quite a few hours. In between where you're going to be out on your own, and and it's always like a trade-off with when you are at one of the checkpoints, like do you don't want to spend too much time there, because obviously you're not moving. I always feel like, if I'm just wasting time if I'm spending too much time here. But at the same time, it's like, well, now if I'm, it could be, 6, 8 hours, before I'm going to get to the next checkpoint. So it's also, it's like, well, you want to make sure you get everything taken care of. If you need to, you're going to change socks or, make sure you get the food you need, get your water refilled, all that kind of stuff, reapply any lube or anything, any of that kind of stuff, because you'd hate to get, 5 miles down the trail and then realize like, crap, I forgot to do this or forgot to get that, or, it raises the stakes a lot, that you make good use of that time that you do have at a checkpoint. Because if you've, got maybe 6 or 8 hours before the next one, it's definitely going to hurt you if you forget to do something.
Yeah. I just know that was one of the big, the biggest thing that kind of played with me was having to endure the mentalness between aid stations was tough.
And I mean, us being together certainly helped, because I've been out there.
I mean, if I'd have been by myself, I'd be like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been out there on my own, both at, Susitna and White Mountains other years, where, it's, I mean, that's especially like through the middle of the night and going, you're just out there by yourself, and it's a long haul out there. And that's something I'm going to have to really plan well for, assuming, or if I get into Arrowhead, because that one's even worse. There's for 135 miles, there's only 3 checkpoints. So
Wow.
It's about every 35 miles is all that's there. So that one's going to be an even bigger deal to kind of make sure I get those right, and I guess bring some stuff to entertain me in between checkpoints and keep me from going crazy, all being out there all night.
Yeah, for sure.
With Susitna, do you have to carry a sled? If you could fit all your stuff in a pack, can you do that?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, there's no requirement to pull a sled. They just have the gear requirement. And I do know a couple guys that have done that. They had, the first year or two that they did the race, they pulled a sled. They decided, this isn't for me, or don't really enjoy this. And so they went ahead and gave it a shot, carrying all the stuff in a pack, so obviously you have to carry a larger pack than, just like basic hydration pack. So they had to carry all that with them. And they did it I'm pretty sure they did it more than once like that. So they, I guess they enjoyed it more than pulling a sled. But I know, at least to me, it seems like that's a lot of weight on your shoulders. I mean, even if you're spending the money for the good, like lightweight gear, I mean, that's still going to be a decent amount of weight. I remember picking up one of their packs, at the start, and like, yeah, that's pretty hefty there to be carrying on your shoulders and trying to run with for 100 miles.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, requirement for a negative 20-degree bag. If you got lots of money, I'm sure there's a light one out there, but those things aren't light.
Yeah. Well, and I think I know there's places, I think like from REI, you can usually rent stuff. But yeah, exactly. You can certainly pay the big bucks and, shave a few pounds, but it's still going to be, a decent amount of gear. And obviously, I mean, you still got to, you got to carry a good amount of water and all that.
So I know with Arrowhead, a lot of people pull sled. Is that a requirement at Arrowhead?
No, I think that one's the same way, although that one even has a little, not a lot, but that one has a little bit more gear required. Generally, I think it's mostly the same as what I was describing for Susitna. I think the biggest addition is you actually have to carry a stove with 8 ounces of fuel or something like that, like a stove and a pot. I'm assuming the thought being you could, like melt snow for water if you needed to. So I think that was the biggest difference, is having to bring that stuff. But I don't think they explicitly say you have to pull a sled, but I think at that point, with in any pictures or video I've ever seen of that race, the runners have always been pulling the sled. So
I'm interested on how you train for these. I mean, luckily you're in Alaska, so
yeah,
it makes it a little easier. But going out, I guess it's more motivation too, because if you got a 20 mile run and it's cold and snowing, like then you're also out in the elements, unless you're doing it with someone else. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't want to say danger, but a lot of unknowns training for these type of events.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, well, like you say, it's a lot of it's just the motivation to get out there and do it. I mean, I'm lucky enough. I do have a good, group of running friends here, and that a lot of them, do these sorts of races, and so it makes it a little bit easier when you're able to go out and train with, some like-minded people. Getting out there and train, because I train with the sled, like, pretty much as soon as there's enough snow on the ground to start pulling it. I at least do like all my long runs pulling the sled, not necessarily like shorter runs during the week, but pretty much do all my long runs pulling the sled. And that, that slows you down. So then, yeah, if you're going to, you want to get out and do a 20-mile training run, it's going to take just that much longer because the sled definitely slows you down. It's always kind of fun though. Like this one friend of mine, she ran Susitna for the first time last year. And I know she was having a great time with the sled training because every time she went out, she's bringing along like a big thermos of, coffee or hot chocolate. Or, you kind of learn that it's like, oh, when you have the sled, you kind of have this like roaming aid station that you just bring around with you. It's you kind of throw. Gets very easy to just throw extra stuff in there, extra snacks and stuff like that. I mean, obviously that can get dangerous at some point if you're, weighing the sled down too much. But yeah, so that part of it definitely can make it a little more enjoyable. Certainly here, and I'm in Anchorage. We've got quite a good kind of like urban trail system. So there's quite a bit of trail running I can do without having to get like too far, out there. And just in case something does go bad or it just starts getting too cold, I can, pack things, get back to my truck fairly quickly and, kind of pack things in versus, if I'm like way out, you get way far out and then realize that you're getting too cold or whatever, but you still have a long ways to get back. Obviously that can get dangerous. So try and limit that as much as I can, or especially by myself. I mean, if I'm going to be in that type of a situation, certainly try and make sure I'm out there with other people, just in case, just for safety and whatnot. But yeah, like I said, usually there's some friends who are willing to do some of this stuff with me, so that helps.
How many times have you just stopped and rode the sled?
Not that many. There is always kind of the joke of like riding the sled down the hills and stuff, but it's one of those, because usually you have to have better control of the sled, you usually have like rigid poles so you've got like a waist belt, and then you have like rigid, like usually most people use like little thin like PVC pipe, but that just kind of keeps the better control of the sled and keeps it from like crashing into you on a downhill. So, which is all good, but in terms of like, if you want to ride your sled, then you got to like undo the waist belt and kind of deal with all that stuff, and then walk around and get on the sled, ride it down a little bit of the hill, and then put everything back on once you get down. And So there's a lot of times where it's like, that's not even worth it. It's not a big enough of a hill.
Going down the divide, that might be fun though.
Yeah, oh yeah, something like that. If you had a big hill, that would be a different story. But yeah, like during like the Susitna race, I mean, there's hardly any hills where it's would even be worthwhile. Just making me think. So on Arrowhead, like most of these winter races, there's 3 divisions. You can, bike it, ski it, or run it. There's an additional division for Arrowhead that they call out, and that's specifically for a kick sled. And that could be pretty cool riding down that. You hit some of the downhills and stuff that I could see that being fun riding down. I know there's a guy here that did Susitna a few years ago with a kick sled.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at the results because Susitna does not have a specific kick sled division, so I don't know what they would have counted him as, if that was running or skiing. I'd have to go back and look at that, but
Yeah,
that could be fun.
a kick sled would be fun at the Whites, I think.
Yeah, well, at least the downhills.
The downhills, yeah,
any
would
of those
not be fun
places where
going
you
up.
could just like coast for a really long time.
Yeah,
Or like that guy that was on the split board
yeah.
this last year, like that,
Torf,
something
yeah.
like that. That could be a lot of fun on the downhills, not so much on some of the other places. But
No. What's been your coldest adventure that you've
so actually, the coldest that I've ran in last winter. There's this it's not even a race really. They just call it kind of like a fun run. There's this town that's a little bit north of Anchorage called Willow. And they have like every winter they have kind of it's more just like their little like Willow town fair. I don't know what they call it officially, but they have little family activities and all that, and then they've got a whole bunch of trails out there. So they have this kind of tour of the Willow trails that's like I think it's like a 25K, which similarly most people are either biking it or skiing it. And so I went out there. I've gone out there a few times and done it. Went out there last year with a few friends, and like as we're driving out there, like we're just watching, the temperature in the car just dropping and dropping and dropping. And well, I'm sure for you up in Fairbanks, you've dealt with colder running, but I think by the time we got out there, I think when we started, it was like 38 below. So that was pretty decent. That's
Yeah.
I mean, I think at White Mountains before it's hit about like minus 30 overnight as the coldest that I've seen there during that race. So yeah, this was pretty decent. So
That's crazy. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. You mentioned Resurrection Pass races, the 50 mile and the 100 mile, but you're actually the race director for those.
yes, it's kind of funny how that's all come full circle. So in 2012 and 2013, those were my first 50 and 100 mile races that I ran. And I've done the 100 there several times. I guess that's actually the only time I've ran the 50 miler there. And then back in, I guess like more like the end of 2019, it was a different friend of mine who was the race director of it back then. And it's one of those that's kind of passed through a number of different hands over the years. It's a pretty low key. I mean, it's a free race. So it's been a very just kind of, I don't know, low key community driven thing for a lot of years. I mean, this last year was, I want to say is the 28th year that it's been going on. But anyways, yeah, back in like 2019, he had 2 young kids, and it was just kind of getting to be a lot for him. And so he started, sort of fishing around amongst his friends if anybody was interested in potentially taking it over. And so me and, well, the same cousin that I've mentioned before, we decided to give it a go. And then funny enough, so this was all like late 2019 when we're talking about this and agreeing to this. And then of course, like started, early 2020 comes and COVID hits, and and so we're like immediately trying to figure out how to, if we can even do the race and how to make that work. And luckily it's a very remote race, and it's it's all out on these remote trails, and it's not a huge amount of people that we're talking about, so we were still able to make it all happen. But
Oh,
it was
cool.
just kind of funny that pretty much like right after we agreed to take this on, we get this huge monkey wrench thrown in. But yeah, no, it's cool to see all that come full circle and to be directing it now. And so we just had it about a month ago, and this was our 5th year of directing it. So that's pretty cool. It's been fun to keep that thing going.
Awesome. Well, talk to us a little bit about your gear. What shoes, what kind of gear you're using for winter, and what your sled. You've homemade your sled, right?
Yep.
Yep.
So yeah,
Talk us about all of that.
Yeah. Well, so going back, so like shoes, I've been a huge ultra fan pretty much from the very beginning. I mean, I remember running into those guys at like a booth, like when they had their very first shoe out at a race, and like they had barely even started and hardly anybody even knew about them, and I ended up chatting them up and buying a pair, and been a big fan ever since. So I like those a lot. For a while there, they were selling a pair of Lone Peaks that were waterproof and insulated.
Hmm.
It was like the Lone Peak Neo, I think is what they called them. And those are awesome for the winter. I love those. But like so many other shoe companies, they stopped making my favorite shoe. So that was a little bit of a bummer. But they still work well. Even regular Lone Peaks. So yeah, I mean, I'm still a big fan there. Still use those for summer and winter. They work well. Big fan of the Injinji toe socks. So the kind of the combo there has always worked well for me. Very, get very few blisters and all that. I was using like Ultimate Direction packs for a long time. And I still have one that I still use a fair amount, but more recently got one of the like Solomon skin packs, and I've really liked that. That one's been real nice, a little more, I don't know, kind of streamlined, but a little lower profile, which is pretty nice. So I've been pretty happy with that. And then getting into the winter stuff, I homemade my sled. There is one company up here that actually does make sleds. Not necessarily. Well, I guess they do have specific racing ones that some people have, but I kind of like doing my own thing and be able to customize it. And I've changed it a number of times over the years, like as I've used it and figured out what works or what doesn't. Been able to kind of change things up, and it's evolved a bit over the years, and made my own cover for it, where it like zips right down the middle and so I can get to everything, but then it's all protected and covered, and it's just made out of this real like thin nylon, and so the snow just slides right off of it. If it is getting any sort of snow on top of it, it's real slick, so snow slides right off, so that works real well. So yeah, I've been happy with that. And it's funny because like I haven't written in it in a long time, but I had like my my blog that I used to do a lot more with. But I have a lot of stuff in there about like how I built my sled, a lot of pictures and details there. And like that specifically, I have had so many people come up to me at like just randomly at races. Like I have no idea who this person is, but they're just like, you're Brandon. And like, thank you so much. That was so helpful. And da 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 da. And I'm like, I have no idea who you are, but I'm glad I'm glad it was helpful to you.
Yeah, I
It's
saw
like,
it too. I mean, I think you sent it to me, and it was like,
oh,
it
okay,
was
yeah.
super
Yeah.
impressive.
Well, yeah, it's funny. It's like I hardly do. I mean, I don't really do anything with it anymore, but I've had enough people tell me that it's like I just keep, I just keep the site up just to, because obviously people are, still getting use out of that. So it's like, whatever, I'll keep it up for that if nothing else.
That's awesome. Well, one question we always ask our guests at the end is someone from your network that you think would have cool stories and would be a really good fit for our podcast. And you have a wealth of knowledge of cool people. I can't wait to hear who you suggest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can think of a lot, but the one that probably comes top of my head, there's this woman here locally that she runs with us a lot in our group. Her name's Jen Novobilsky. I'm not 100% sure I'm pronouncing that right, but she's done a ton of races. I mean, she did Susitna for the first time this last year. She's gone, out of state and done a ton of races. And the really big one that would be really cool to talk to her more about, this past summer, she flew over to the UK and did this kind of stage race where she ran like 1,000 miles across like all of the entirety of the UK over like a month.
Wow.
Holy
Yeah,
cow.
that'd be super cool.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So she's definitely got some cool stories from that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, Brandon, we'll give you a second to shout out whoever you want to shout out, and then also mention where people can find you on socials.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll just shout out to my favorites with Ultra and Ultra Sign Up. Very always been big fans of them, whether I'm beneficially an ambassador or not. And then online I'm pretty much I run Alaska on everything. So any of the socials is that, and then my blog that I mentioned that doesn't get a whole lot of action, but still apparently has some good stuff that people enjoy on there. Is the same, just irunalaska.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was great hearing about your hold adventures.
Yeah,
I can't wait to run with you again.
Yeah, sure thing.
Well, if you like Brandon's podcast, please leave us a review on any platform that you listen to this. We're on Apple. We're not on Google anymore because Google doesn't exist, but we're on Spotify. You name it, we're on it. Leave us a review. Drop us a comment on the Instagram on Golden Hour Adventures Podcast. Let us know what you thought about Brandon's adventures. If you want to reach out to Brandon, you saw it. Run Alaska, hit him up. Go check out his home-built sled. It does not look like a home-built sled. It looks like a purchased sled. But go check it out. Leave us a review. Leave us a like. Thanks. See you on the trails.